Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fifth instalment of Steer's Election Reflection Series, where we're bringing together industry experts for a 30-minute conversation on the impact of Labour's agenda across cities, transport and infrastructure. My name is Neil Chadwick. I'm a director here at Steer. I'm based in Leeds, and my work area focuses on transport strategy and public policy. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation about what Labour government will mean for buses. I'm very grateful to be joined by Simon Warburton, Executive Director for Transport at West Yorkshire Combined Authority. Before I introduce Simon properly, just a note that you'll be able to find subtitled recordings of this session and other sessions on our website, steergroup.com. As we're talking, you'll be able to use the comments section to share your views as the conversation goes on. However, given the condensed format of these events, we won't be responding to these comments live, but we'll review your questions and comments after the event. So, back to Simon, who has been integral to Greater Manchester's transport policy since 1999, and now spearheads West Yorkshire Combined Authority's transport initiatives. His leadership includes expanding transport infrastructure and overseeing a significant £1 billion plus investment programme aimed at enhancing multi-modal transport to meet the daily needs of West Yorkshire's 2.3 million residents. Welcome, Simon. So Simon, speaking in Manchester on 11th of July, our new Transport Secretary Lou Haig said, buses are the lifeblood of communities, but the system is broken. Change starts now. This new government will give local leaders the tools they need to deliver better buses up and down the country. Our plan will create and save vital bus routes by giving every community the power to take back control of their bus services through franchising or public ownership. And in the King's speech, the government announced a Better Buses Bill. So all the noises of our buses are going to be a big thing for this government. So my first question, let's start the conversation today with franchising, if we could. On the 14th of March, the Mayor of West Yorkshire, Tracy Brabin, and the Combined Authority decided to move from the current deregulated system to franchising. So from your experience of piloting the franchise assessment here in West Yorkshire, and before that your work in Greater Manchester, what would you suggest to government could be done to reform the process, and what should be in the Better Buses Bill? Over to you, Simon.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Nick. I think it's probably important, first of all, just to reflect back on why is it that in a number of the mayoral combined authority areas now we're moving into bus franchising models, and that totally understand that the Secretary of State has set out political statements in that regard. If we kind of get beneath that language, I think what the analysis has suggested for quite some time now is that our bus systems in our city regions in particular have lacked the consistency that we believe is needed in order to be a functioning part of that base infrastructure, transport infrastructure, energy infrastructure, and so forth, that support a successful place. So the approach that we're taking is very much a customer-focused approach, but not a customer-focused approach that is simply about soft measures, as we've always tended to see it in the transport industry, but is about sort of hard realities, that we have a cohort of society who remain very dependent on our bus networks, and have been open to something of a postcode lottery in terms of the level of the service that they receive, depend on who happens to be running their local buses, and that has held back the travel horizons in some places amongst those communities. And holding back travel horizons means that we're holding back people's economic horizons as well. So if you want to be able to achieve growth in what we might term our more sort of foundation economy, then we have to be able to take that constraint away. And then the second element has been that inconsistency in terms of the offer has meant that those who do have a choice have increasingly taken the choice to travel by car with all of the certainty, as they would see it, that car has to offer. So we've got two groups in society, both of whom are in need of a different offer, and that's why we're bringing forward the proposals, and we're bringing forward now the model in West Yorkshire for franchising. Franchising, I must stress, is about making the best of the public and the private sector. It's a very different proposition to municipalisation, for example. And so this is still very much about public and private sector working together, but working together within a consistent framework. So when we look at the legislation that government's now bringing forward, for those places like ourselves where the decision has already been taken, we would probably advise back into government that there may well be some aspects of the process that we have been through now that could be simplified. I tread carefully in that regard, because the decisions that are taken to move to franchising are very serious decisions. They require that they do have impact on businesses, and so they need to be taken carefully. So there's maybe some elements there, but actually we're probably most focused on what else would we like to see to strengthen our model.
Yeah.
From a powers perspective, I think there's probably two elements. One, we need to make sure that we've got the right provisions in place for a circumstance where a franchisee finds themselves in a difficult economic position, which may be something that's driven by their wider business as opposed to necessarily the business within the franchise, and that we can move to ensure that a service is maintained for the travelling public.
So in essence, that's like the equivalent of a rail operator
of last resort, and we need to make sure that process is as simple as possible, because maintaining the network is fundamental. And then beyond that, what we're looking at is making sure that we can address all of the aspects that have held people back from choosing bus. And one aspect in particular that's really come to the fore as we've worked through devolution discussions with government is actually around the potential for us to strengthen measures against antisocial behaviour on public transport. So we're very keen to see the ability, excuse me, for us to establish bylaws on our bus systems in very much the same way that we see on heavy rail and light rail systems. So that the PCSO models that we've all started to roll out have got real bite to them.
Okay. Thinking about that's really interesting. So that you set out the motivation, the consistency of service, and making sure that there's a better quality alternative to car travel for those who do have a choice. In terms of the franchising process itself, you've gone through essentially 3 stages. You've done the franchising assessment, and then there's an audit, and then you have consultation on that. And my colleagues across the office who've supported you through that process, and along with your sort of financial advisors at PwC and your legals from DLA, you appreciate that's quite a long and an extensive process. Now you've gone through that, so any change in legislation is not going to help you. But just thinking about others who might be thinking about it. Do you think if there's a change in the law to have a presumption in favour of franchising? So essentially what you're doing at the moment is the presumption is in favour of the current system and you have to show why you want to change it. But if you change the law so there's a presumption in favour of franchising, that could potentially, for those others who think you're going through this process, simplify the matter greatly.
So I think there's a logic to that, given where the process has got to now. But in the same way as the balance of the presumption at the moment then caused a debate around what are the unintended consequences of that presumption, and there were some elements that were sort of built into the process to handle that. Equally, we need to ensure that there aren't unintended consequences of that presumption. And I think in particular, the element that we've all been very acutely aware of is how we maintain a diversity within the bus market, and the diversity in particular that we are all very sensitive to maintain is to ensure that there's a good, healthy space within a franchising marketplace for smaller operators who do have very focused skill sets on discrete markets, so that they're not crowded out through the franchising process. So I think the presumption is right. But I'd want us to be working very closely with CPT, who I think have been excellent in terms of the way in which they've developed their capabilities through the last few years, just to make sure that we would get that right.
Okay, that's quite nice, because that naturally moves me on to my second topic. You've put an awful lot of effort to get to the decision to go to franchising. But in some ways, you've done the easy bit now.
Yeah.
And you've got the hard bit to do, which is to move from the decision to do franchising to implement it. So when will we see franchise bus services running in West Yorkshire? And what do you see as the immediate challenges as you move into this implementation phase?
So we've got a three tranche approach to franchising in West Yorkshire. Tranche one effectively handles the southwest of the conurbation. Tranche two largely handles the east of the conurbation, and then tranche three the northwest of the conurbation. And over the next couple of weeks, we'll have concluded a contemporary review of the network, and we'll set out a network map that clarifies which services we see in each of those three tranches. First tranche we bring to the market in October 2025 for operation in spring 27, and the process then continues such that by autumn 2028 we've got a fully franchised bus system operational. There's a big mobilisation programme that's underway. I took a report to the Combined Authority just this last week, setting out how we've organised ourselves around that approach, and we see 5 elements to the change programme. So there's a customer transition programme which is driven by a branding exercise, which, whilst it will determine what colour might you want the buses to look like, is not actually about what colour do you want the buses.
Well, that's the bit that's going to cause the most disruption, isn't it?
The most important bit, obviously, but it's about setting out how an organisation and its partners come together around an entire customer proposition. And is really fundamental. The second element is around network planning and management. We know that we need to step on in terms of the way in which we coordinate the management of the highways network in West Yorkshire to support the best possible functioning bus network. And we also need to build capability inside the organisation how to plan an entire network. Third element.
That management side is not just you, the combined authority, but it's working with your district partners.
Very much so.
Yeah, potentially thinking about moving traffic offences, bus lane enforcement, etc., etc.
It's exactly that, and it's also about how we move to that next stage of managing events around our transport system as well, which increasingly present themselves as our cities become more dynamic places. The third element, yes. The third element is the rest of the systems piece, if you like, which is around data and digital. We become the owners of significant market data. We need to make sure that we can use the data to good effect. In order to do that, we need good systems in the back office, and there's a whole program kicking off around that. Fourth area is around the physical assets. So we set out in our plan an intention to take ownership of the 9 largest depots to build a 10th large depot. And there's a process that's now starting of inspection of those depots, and incumbent operators have been incredibly supportive in helping us to get that going. We also want to move our fleet strategy on as well. And then the final element is around the contracting process itself. So we haven't written bus franchises before. It's a competitive market. We need to make sure that we play our role in managing that process in a competitive market very well. And so that whole change process involves a series of activities that we do once over, and they then embed themselves into the organisation. And so in common with the approach that we took in Greater Manchester, we will largely run the first cycle through to the end of 28 as a programme. We're building that programme complement. We just recently identified, and apologies, I can't remember whether we've clarified to the market or not, so I won't name them for the moment, a consortium of professional services partners to work with us, particularly in support of those commercial elements within the proposition. And over the next few weeks, I'll be advertising with the support of a recruitment company, the recruitment for a transition programme director to oversee the programme. And then the organisation learns alongside that programme over the next 4 years and teaches itself how to become a franchising authority.
There's a really substantial body of work that has to be done. And at the end of this, the combined authority is going to look like a different organisation than it does now. Yeah.
Yeah, very, very much so, Neil. And if we bear in mind, of course, that at the same time we're bringing forward the first 2 tram lines through the mass transit programme, then yes, it's our intention that by the end of 2028, we are a body which is running a franchise bus system and starting to deliver a tram system, and that's a fundamental step change in the organisation.
In terms of the work you've got to do to get to franchising, and then once you're in that franchise world, 2028, maintain that franchising system. To me, that's going to be one of the really big challenges for the further rollout of franchising elsewhere. Combined authorities are well resourced, and I think a lot of unitary authorities, county councils, would look with sort of green-eyed envy at some of the leverage that you have around that resource.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think, looking ahead, once you have those systems and processes established, there's opportunity to share that? You could help
definitely
the smaller cities, the smaller authorities around Yorkshire and elsewhere get to that franchising stage.
Definitely so. We're all on a journey here. We're all learning. Even the great and mighty Transport for Greater Manchester, who I moved on from, has been on a huge learning exercise, and there's already very, very significant dialogue within the urban transport group to share good practice, to deliver efficiency through shared knowledge as much as we can, and we have to continue that process. And it may well be that as matters evolve, there's a role for the subnational transport bodies as well to support some parts with that, in the same way that they've been doing a great job in terms of supporting with transport analysis as well. So yeah, there are models to be put in place yet, but that principle has to be the right principle.
Okay. So one of the things that Lou Haig talks about was removing the barrier to public ownership of bus companies. But a little earlier on, you said you are not looking at that. I think you called it municipalisation of it. At this stage, you're not sort of thinking of the fact that there could be the West Yorkshire Combined Authority owned arm length company which is up there bidding.
No. So what we do agree with the government around, and I think we all do, is over time it may well be that there is a suitable space, particularly in extreme circumstances. We talked before about operator of last resort, for example, where that may offer itself as an opportunity. But we shouldn't overlook just what a significant change it is to move from effectively having been PTEs, or if you like, post-deregulation PTEs, into bus franchising authorities. That's a big step change in itself. That is the step change that will very much focus our efforts in a number of different places through the remainder of this decade. But we do understand that the Secretary of State wants to be able to offer up the broadest toolkit, and we do know that there are parts of the country where arm's length municipal bus companies were maintained and have proved to be really successful models. So when I comment, I kind of comment from the perspective of where we got ourselves to as post-deregulation PTEs.
Yeah,
it's a much more diverse market than that. I've only ever worked in post-deregulation PTE territory, and so I suspect that the Secretary of State is being very sensible in broadening out the toolkit.
Sure, that's good. I mean, one of the key things to make franchising a success is going to make the money that you do have work hard. So on one side of the equation, there's going to be the costs of the contracts. On the other side of the equation, there are two sources of funding. One is the fare box, and in your case, the Combined Authority's case, you've taken the decision to take that revenue risk on. Then the other side is the funding that comes from government in one form or another. And I think it's important to recognise that quite a substantial amount of the funding that goes into buses is actually public subsidy.
Absolutely.
So it seems helpful then to sort of talk a bit about funding, because you need to make the most out of that. So in Bus Back Better, the Johnson government, if you remember them, some time back, committed to reform BSOG, the Bus Service Operator Grant. And since then, we've had, in West Yorkshire, we've had mayor's fares, and nationally there's the £2 scheme. So that's another source of essentially public subsidy. And then on top of that, we have the English National Concessionary Fare Scheme, CTS, which has largely moved away from being a subsidy to the passenger to a subsidy for the operator, so another form of subsidy. So it seems right that the whole subsidy system is open to reform, thinking about how does it work in a franchise context. From your perspective, from a combined authority, where would you like to see that subsidy pots go, and how they're distributed?
Yeah, so it's our view that the time's right now to conclude that review of bus service operators grant for exactly the reasons that you've just set out. So we have a series of different funding streams at present, and of course we've had BSIP in a very differently dispersed model around the country. And then you have
Zebra as well to support the electric buses. So another funding pot to draw from.
Well, indeed. So I think our view would be that for all of those revenue items that are picked up in various different models, the opportunity to to house as many of those in one consistent contemporary BSOG model feels like absolutely the sensible way for us to do that. But certainly for those places that are moving to franchising. And we've done a lot of work, again, through Urban Transport Group to help to shape that thinking. And I'm hoping that the whole issue of bus revenue is an item that is picked up through the 30th October budget position, because it's incredibly important that it is, if for no other reason than the national £2 fare actually only currently has a funding base until the end of the calendar year. So we do need to determine where we go next on that front. We need to look at the extent to which there's a balance between the certainty of national fares and the commercial models that we are moving into in franchising areas, and where do we strike the right balance in that regard. And then we need to look at, you touched on it with Zebra, the distinction between capital funding and revenue funding, which of course plays itself out all the more if we as the public sector are much more at the forefront. And there's undoubtedly, and we were starting to explore this in Greater Manchester with CRSTS and Fleet, there's undoubtedly the opportunity for us to use some public capital to take pressure off revenue models in bus service provision, which gives us the opportunity to then look at how we can be more entrepreneurial through a franchising model in growing particularly the intensity of our services in cities outside London. The frequency of our networks is quite often a significant factor in holding back people from choosing bus as an alternative.
So those could be models where you're not going down the municipalisation route, but you could be into the fleet business where you're helping provide the vehicles to the operators. And that also then drives your quality point, isn't it? That then there's a consistent and standard offer across the West Yorkshire fleet.
Absolutely.
That's really good. Look, I'm sure we could continue this for quite some time yet, but I'm afraid our half an hour is whizzing by, and we're coming close to the end of our allotted time. So I just want to say a big thank you to Simon for being with us today and sharing your insights, and thanks also to everyone who's joined us this afternoon. We have one further session planned for next week, with our attention turning to rail. So if you haven't signed up for that session, you can visit our website or sign up via the email that will land in your inbox this afternoon for those who signed up. So with that, it's goodbye from Simon and goodbye from me, and thank you everyone for joining us today.